Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Agnetta. I'm from the Windows Phone team. So today you'll hear me talk about Windows Phone, a little bit more than Windows, but I will make a moment to pause and talk about Windows and Windows Phone and how they might relate, particularly as it relates to design. Before I get started, thank you all for attending this talk. I know it's the last one. I know that you're all probably tired and excited to start coding on your tablets. I'll try and make this as enjoyable as possible. We'll get out of here early, hopefully. Let's make it a conversation, so interrupt me with a question, and if you do have a question, try to make it to a microphone, and we'll go. The second thing I'd like to say, and hopefully you can all join me, is I'd like to congratulate the Windows team on a fantastic product release. I think they did a great job. And then keep it going because they just had a great conference, don't you think? As I said, today I'm going to talk about Windows Phone design. And if you like what I say today about Windows Phone design, there are 3 talks you should also check out that happened earlier in the week about Windows design. The first one was done by Sam Moreau, the second was Jensen Harris, and the third was done by Kai Hofmeister and JK. They were talking about the principles of Windows, the Windows design, Metro style. They were talking about touch and gestures, and they were talking a little bit about the inspiration of what they've been calling Metro style and what we call Metro style as well. So with that, I'm going to get started and talk to you about journeys. I'll tell you a little bit about the Windows Phone team's journey to reinvent ourselves, and then talk to you about the journey that you guys should take keep in mind when you're developing your app, and that's called the user journey. So it's now been just under a year since our release of our phone, and we're coming up to another release of Windows Phone. Hopefully you'll all like it. But we set out to do something different. We wanted a different kind of phone. There was a moment back in our early iterations where we looked at what we were doing and we looked at what our competitors were doing, and we said, boy, this is all the same. But we decided to do something different and build a different kind of phone. And it's inspired, as you probably heard Sam Moreau talk about, by clear, clean, and beautiful typography and wayfinding mechanisms such as signs. It is a powerful way to make your content shine. And we did that in our platform, and we're eager for you guys to do that on our platform as well. We went through tons of iteration when we said, okay, here we go. We're going to reinvent ourselves, and we're going to base ourselves on typography. We spent months with a 70-person team trying to figure out how Metro style will appear on Windows Phone. And all of those are real concepts produced by our team. And there's hundreds and hundreds more. And every single one of them can be called Metro style. They celebrate typography. They're minimalist in their approach. And they let the content pop. But we eventually landed on something that you'll recognize today as Windows Phone. But I show this to you because it can be your source of inspiration. Some people look at Windows Phone and might look at Windows and say, wow, that's great. That's really beautiful. But I want my app to stand out a little bit. Well, Metro is a design language. It is the foundation that we hope you start from. And then eventually you inject your own brand and your own style so that Metro can support you in your business and brand needs. So if I saw an app that looked like those appear on Windows Phone, I'd be really excited. Because it would have been somebody saying, I think I can innovate on this. And that's one of the calls to action across every single talk that you've probably been to this week. It's been about innovating on top of our platforms and getting in the game with us. So Metro is our design language. We call it Metro because it's modern and clean. It's fast and in motion. It's about content and typography, and it's entirely authentic. Metro style is what makes us different. And here's a slide I'm going to stop on for a little bit. And we could probably talk for hours and hours on end about this. Metro style is essentially becoming Microsoft's design language. What's a design language? Is it the controls you use? Is it what color you use? It can be all of those things, but let me separate it this way. Metro Style is our design platform. It's how our designers will begin conversing with each other to say, here is how Microsoft wants to represent its products and its brand. And you can see that in Xbox. You can see that in Windows Phone. You can see that in the tablets that all of you received this week. You'll see it, hopefully, in other products that we do. And hopefully, we'll see it in your applications. It does not mean that the controls are always the same across all of these things. So we need to separate ourselves from the controls we use to build on a platform, from the style we use. Because some controls are going to work really, really well on the tablets. And some controls are going to work really well on a smaller screen like a phone. But they won't necessarily translate. But the style you use will translate across. And that's the artistic sense, the flavor you put into your phone or your desktop application. So when you hear Windows Phone talk about Metro, and you hear Windows talk about Metro, and you hear perhaps Xbox talk about Metro, we're talking about the style, the design language, or if you will, the design platform. We're not necessarily talking about the controls, although using the right controls at the right time does help you achieve the style. It also speaks to use cases. If you're building a tablet application and you say to yourself, boy, wouldn't it be great to make this a phone application? I'll just shrink it down to a 3-inch diagonal screen. It's probably not the best way to go. Let's take, for example, an application that might help you book flights on an airplane. Well, you might imagine, on the one hand, you have a phone app. Yes, you can book your flight from a phone, but isn't it easier to do that on a tablet? And so if you think about that, but from the phone you could check in really easy. So right there we start to think about the priorities and the use cases that are different between the various platforms. So a direct pixel-by-pixel translation from one platform to the other may not always be the best thing. So make sure that as you're thinking about applying your application efforts on one or many of the Microsoft platforms, that you work through the use cases and say, what is the best thing that a user can do on a tablet? What is the best thing that the user can do on the phone? And yes, there'll be some overlap, but it may not be identical on both platforms. So I'm going to move on to Windows Phone now and celebrate the fact, on this slide, that Microsoft has a beautiful design language that we're sharing with you, but the rest of the talk is going to move to Windows Phone. I will do my best to tie in some conversations about Windows as I go, but here we go on our journey. So we talked about the design language being a critical differentiator of Windows Phone and now Windows. But for Windows Phone, we have another differentiator, and it's integration. Windows Phone is the first and best example of Microsoft's products all landing on one platform and looking like they belong together. That's a pretty amazing thing to say, because if you think about the design style and usage goals of an Xbox versus Office, one is very professional, one is very playful. But we got them to land on Windows Phone and look like they belong, because they both use Metro. But they both were able to be, at their core, what they are. Office on Windows Phone looks very professional, and Xbox on Windows Phone looks very playful. And they didn't sacrifice a single element of their brand promise. And that is something that you can do on Windows Phone and Windows as well. So we invite you to integrate onto Windows Phone and on Windows in the very same way, and we'll help you get there. So I want to talk about advanced application design. I'm going to refresh a little bit about the basics. I'm going to talk to you about a design-driven process and then taking it to the next level. And what I mean by that is you'll probably see a whole bunch of applications that are starting to look the same. They're reusing patterns, which is really great because that means people are adopting the language. But now you can evolve the language. You can innovate on the language, and that's part of the call to action. And then finally, I'll walk through a little bit of a use case of applying it. So refreshing the basics, Metro principles. Sam Moreau hit these very well in his talk a day or two ago. They are pride in craftsmanship. Take the time to look at how your application lays out. Respect that a typographic based visual language aligns on a grid, and in doing so, it allows your content to shine through. Be fast and fluid. The application should look good and perform extremely well. It should use motion that reinforces a user action. Sacrifice any one of those, whether it be how it looks, how it performs, or your use of motion, and your user will say they don't like your application. You need to take pride in making it near perfect or near great. I'll talk to you about ways how you can guarantee that. Be authentically digital. And what that means, there's a lot of different interpretations. In fact, I'll even tell you a little story. When we first started talking about being authentically digital, there was some blogger someplace who said, man, every time I hear Windows Phone, and now the Windows team, talk about being authentically digital, it makes me want to barf rainbow pixels. But it's something we take very personal. Being authentically digital means embracing the space that your application lands. So Windows Phone is a small screen, it's flat. And when we took a look at designing for that platform, we said, well, what's the best effort? What's the best type of style we can put on that would embrace a small flat screen? And we started to look at signage and typography and said, man, you know, nobody ever gets confused if you embrace the same practices as a typographer or a sign designer or typographic designer. And then we said, wow, well, there's something really interesting here. If we don't put a bevel or put a piece of chrome in our UI, our content starts to shine more. So we started focusing by being authentically digital and saying, hey, we're going to live very comfortably in this space and be, at first appearance, very flat. Our content seems to be more rich. And in doing it, we became more and more authentic. We embraced the neighborhood that we lived in. That is not to say that the other design languages are wrong. They're doing something different. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a bit. But when you're authentically digital, you end up giving your content more room to shine. And you actually end up having to decorate it less because the content is the star of the show. Finally, win as one is a very big principle across all the platforms. What that means is, essentially, that the platform has started to produce some principles and rules. We have app bars, we have pivots, we have panoramas, and we have tiles. And we've created a system of navigation where a user can go from start to their application, to a card, and then back. As you guys start to build your apps, emulate and copy those rules. If you start to create your own, whether it be a new control that does something that we already do, or you start overloading the use or utility of a control that we've given you, what will end up happening is that a user will have to learn not only the metaphor that we gave them, but the metaphor that you also gave them. And you'll create a little confusion in the mind of the user. So by winning as one, what we mean is look at what we've done. Use those practices and emulate those. And what the user will go through is a learn once, use everywhere pattern. So they'll see a pattern occur in contacts, and then your app will come along, and if you've copied the navigation style, the user will immediately know how to use your app. If you create something new that does the same thing because you're concerned, then all of a sudden the user will have to relearn for you and then question what the platform did. So together, we all have to kind of work together. Use the patterns that Windows have come out with on their tablets. Use the patterns that we've come out with on Windows Phone. Push, definitely innovate, but use those patterns as a starting point. I want to make a point, or go back to a point that I talked about a little earlier about Chrome and overly decorating your content. It points to a dichotomy in design language. You can be iconographic, or you can be what we are, infographic. Those are two different languages. Both are right. There's nothing wrong. Apple and Android make great products. They're great competitors. They have delightful user sets, and they have delightful applications. You'll never get me to say anything else. They're great. We're great too. We're doing something different. And when you play in our space, play with us. And what it means to be infographic is that the content is represented as it exists. So in the case where you have a clock, just tell the user the time. You don't have to rebuild the bevels and glass and put a highlight to where the light might be shining on the glass and then put hands to build a clock. You certainly can. But where you say, hey, it's 12 o'clock, just say it's 12 o'clock. Or if you have 5 emails, place some indication that it's an email and put a 5 next to it, and the user immediately knows what is happening in their system. We've reduced the distraction and therefore increased the informativeness of our UI. And that's the difference between being infographic, what Windows and Windows Phone are trying to do, and being iconographic, what Android and Apple are trying to do. Both beautiful, both wonderful, just different approaches to the same problem. As you're designing your application, again, this is the win is one. Get to know the system navigation and hierarchy. Start to emulate it. Windows Phone starts with Start. You tap on your application, and you start to move into the system. You might tap on an item within a list, and you open up a card. You hit back, and the user comes out. Your applications should follow very similar patterns. Trust that we've provided you with the right hardware and navigational models within the system. Back will take you back. You don't need to put a back button in your UI. We've got it covered. Saves you time, in fact. Start is almost the user's safety button. If they ever get lost, or if they want to start a new task, they hit Start, they go right back to the landing page, and then they can begin their new task. Search will always take you to an online search.
How come you guys took away in-app search?
It became a situation. Oh, sorry. The question was, how come we took away in-app search? The reality is that everybody was implementing it different, so we weren't winning as one. And so by coming up with a consistent metaphor in the hardware, so it said, if you touch this button, you'll always go to the same place. We were able to achieve a consistent way of getting to online search, and then enabled you guys to create that variation in the system. So before, we were saying, hey, try and do it this way, and hopefully you'll do it right. We started to realize there was so much variety that we were actually decreasing the usability of the platform. That doesn't mean you guys can't do in-app search. Place a search button in the app bar, launch it. Yeah, a lot of people want to use the hardware button. But that disconnectedness, even within our own native apps, was causing confusion. Great question, though. OK, right. Avoid traps, loops, and phantom pages. You're going to be planning the design of your app, and you're going to have screens out on a huge poster, perhaps. And eventually, you want to be able to walk, at least in your mind or on this piece of paper, how a user might move from the first screen to the last screen. And you'll find, and similarly, you're going to want to imagine the user hitting back with the back button to go back to where they started. There are cases where you might put a button in your UI that might hyperlink them to another piece. If you don't planfully prepare for what the back button will do in those situations, you could create some kind of phantom loop. For instance, you could put a home button in your UI, which would say, hitting this button will always take me back to the first screen. You can do that. But if you don't check what happens in the backstack model, a user who may go deep into your app, hit home, then go deep into your app in another place, hit home, and go deep into your app into another place, and then hit home. If they start hitting back, they would retrace all of those steps. And you were thinking that, well, home is going to make it really easy to navigate through this app. But suddenly you're complicating another problem. So you have to be very, very careful about what navigational controls you put in the system and what impact they'll have to the user. And be predictable. Look at what the system's done. Create rules that replicate what the system has done, and then apply your rules very consistently. And finally, at least on Windows Phone, there are places where you can integrate within the system so that you can create more opportunities to discover your app. So should you build a music app, not only will you be found on the home screen and the app list, but you can also tie into our Music Hub. So we're providing a lot of exposure points for your applications, and it's really, really important to know where they are, because that way your app will get that much more surface area of discovery. As you're designing a page, you have to be very, very concerned about page structure. This rule is very important for Windows design as well, designing for your Windows devices as well. Prioritize. Don't put too much on any single screen because you want your content to have a star, a highlight on a screen. If you say, boy, there's a lot of space, I'm putting everything, or there's a little space, I'm just going to make everything really, really small so I can get everything to fit on a small screen, then you won't have a natural star. You won't have a natural place for the user to go, that's the thing that I was looking for. So it's up to you guys to prioritize and find the elements that you want the users to find first. Make sure that they are found in the right places and placed in the place where they would expect them to be. Keep the user oriented. If you have a running task list of what the users want to do with your application, then the most important things should be larger and near the top. And the secondary and tertiary items should be lower to the bottom or further out of sight so they're not distracting from the key tasks. That is to say, you want to logically order your data and restrain, the number of activities that can occur in any one place. Now, Windows Phone has mechanisms of breaking down the walls of a small screen. We have a concept called pivots and panoramas. So you can pivot between, if you're on email, you can pivot between unread email and flagged email and high importance email. You can use those pivots to then elevate other secondary tasks if you want. Or even in a panorama, you can create a second or third pane in your panorama and show that, hey, there's some other things you can do. You'll still have to resist the urge to create too many panes in your panorama or too many pivots, because ultimately the user will get lost. We recommend hanging around 3 to 5 pivots or 3 to 5 pages in your panorama. Visual and typographic design is also highly, highly influenced by the presence of a grid. There is, on the screen is the Windows Phone grid. It's essentially, I think it's 12 or 24 columns of 12 pixel square grids. This is available on App Hub, where Windows Phone tools are located. In using that, you can align your content and start to emulate the way that a native application on Windows Phone will look. This is super important to making your app look professional and having pride in your craftsmanship. It reduces clutter and it keeps the user, keeps your content capable of emphasizing what's important. And again, use Native App as a guide. We're all in this together. If you have a list, look for a list that you think would work. Look for a list in the system that you think looks like the list that you're trying to create. Copy it. Put it in your code. Then imbue it with your style and your brand. I'll take a point to say Metro and Metro style does not mean you must have a black background and white text or a white background and black text with some accent color. It just means that we're a typographic language. Start this way, then imbue your brand, be it a bluish color or depth, and you will be a great application. Sam Moreau makes a fantastic point on that in his presentation, where he talks about how you can incorporate cinematography into an app and have depth and movement and still have it be Metro style. Go do that. Go innovate and go be great. Put your personality into your app, but embrace some of these typographic principles. There are controls, there are tools, and there are building blocks. There's 2 things I'll point you to today. One is the Windows Phone developer blog. All kinds of presentations, videos like this one, videos that go back to a year ago or before. We're always filming stuff internally to talk about the different challenges of design or development, and they're posted on the App Hub. The link is right there. The Windows Phone design team also blogs, and every once in a while we start to notice patterns in the ecosystem about design, and we say, wow, we really like what we're seeing here. What if you guys started thinking about it this way? Other times we see patterns in the ecosystem that, you know, we realize that there's a misunderstanding in what we've been trying to say, so we'll comment on that. And the other thing we do is we tweet. WP Design Team is our tweeting handle, and you can reach out to us that way. Sometimes we're slow to respond. Oftentimes we'll respond in the blog, not via tweets. That way we can be thorough in our response. So we use very different a lot of different ways to engage all of you as you guys design your apps. So a design-driven process. This is going from think to make. It's about creating a user journey. Yesterday, I met a new friend. Her name is Angela. Hi, Angela. Angela and I walked through an application that she's building, and we walked through the use of a design-driven user journey process. And what we discovered together is that when you do this, not only do you get a better-looking app, you discover many more opportunities for innovation than you would ever thought possible. So the slides that follow from here are something that Angela and I worked through together, and if you come find her, if you talk to her, she will tell you that it was, I hope you'll tell them, she will tell you that it was not only fun to do, but it showed her the real potential in her application and some very innovative things that can happen for her app. Follow these processes, I guarantee you the same thing will happen to you. So, going from think to make, Metro and Metro style is not an engineering process. It's a language, it's a design language. It needs to be explored. And this is all to say the design process is different from the engineering process. It is a creation process. The development process is a build process. They go together, but they have to happen in sequence. It's akin to the difference between planning versus implementation. Now, if you skip the design process and just choose to code and develop your UI as you code, what I've seen happen across almost every app that I've gotten the opportunity to observe come into the system is that those who built and designed at the same time had a ton of last-minute hacks. Lots of bugs started to appear, and lots of extra hours coding to meet their deadlines started to happen. But those apps that followed a design-driven process where they designed and planned first and then followed by building, they had less hacks and more innovation. What does this mean? What do I mean by design-driven? It means the front part of this curve. When you define and explore options and then create a concept only to get feedback and refine those 1, 2, 3, 4 points, that's your design process. What tools do you need? Well, Angela and I use a piece of paper and a pen. That's all you need. It is a time investment when you put the design first. But after you rise up over that curve, going from define to explore, creating multiple concepts, and then getting feedback and refining and saying, hey, you know what, I think it is this, suddenly the coding effort becomes a lot more efficient, a lot less bugs, and I think a lot more enjoyable. Now, if you skip it and you just roll down the curve from commit, the day you have your idea, you start coding, and roll down the curve to realization, I guarantee you that that curve will flip over. And all that investment in design that you skipped now becomes investment in bugs that you have to fix. So, creating a user journey. Know your user. Then make that application personal to the user. Deliver to them the content that is most relevant to them so that they can be present in the moment. Now, if you look at the evolution of man and then add to it the inclusion of mobile phones, and as they have influenced our posture, we started to stand up, and suddenly everybody in the world was walking around like this with their phones, bumping into things. And then the phones became smarter, and we started to bend down and bend down and bend down and bend down. Your application should invite the user to bend down and play with the app. I don't have a problem with that. You should do that. But let them stand up sooner. A great designed application will help them find the thing that they are using or want to use, want to find, and then stand up and enjoy the success that they had in your application. They'll come back, I promise, and then they'll enjoy the world around them. This is to say, essentially, that building an application is the convergence of three things that you have to weigh. Not just how you're going to monetize your app or the business opportunity or the technical challenges that you have with your app, but it's also the experience that you want to deliver. You have to be able to answer at the beginning, is your app useful? Is it usable? And is it desirable? And when you begin to create your user journey with those three questions in your mind, and you have them answered before you begin coding, you'll have a better app. This speaks to app mortality. If you say one day that, oh, I'm going to build this app, and this app will provide new data every time I shake my phone. Maybe it's a new drink or a new cow sound. That's fun for one day, maybe two. But I guarantee you that the user is eventually going to stop using it. And this is data that has been produced in 2009. It was a consultant company produced it. I can't remember the name, but they did it in 2009, and they were looking at iPhone applications. And I should say that this is not a criticism of iPhone applications or iPhones. This is just sort of a pattern they observed in mobile application usage, was that after a couple days, users were stopping to go back to these applications. So your challenge is how do you get users to come back into the app? Some apps get a little bit of some forgiveness in this pattern, particularly sports. And when you think about what is it about sports that gets to break this curve a little bit, it's because the data is always fresh and always new. And the user group is a little bit more passionate about the data that's coming out of there. But eventually, they follow the same curve. This is all to say that applications have these long-tail behaviors of gradual use. You break that curve through your own innovation, your application stands out as one of the greater ones. So how do you do that? Well, I like to propose that you really take these three calls to action personal. Attract the user with your application. Make your tile professionally designed and make it informative. Delight the user. When they go into your app, do they see content that is beautifully displayed and relevant to them? And retain the user by giving them something new or personal to them, and keep it fresh. If you can do that, much like a social network or a sports app, the users will come back. Now, sports apps, for instance, for those of you who might be writing them, the data gets stale after the league goes on break, after the league season is over. Well, there are lots of ways to get over that. Well, maybe you push in news feeds. Users will come back for that. Or what about a quiz? If it's maybe you have a fantasy sports league and where you're tracking the scores and everything, and then the league ends, what if you started another challenge about sports quizzes, about the players on everybody's teams, or the quizzes about the teams that people are following? And if you tracked everybody and how they were answering, and you could say, well, this person is the best at answering the New England Patriots questions, and this one is the best answering New York Jets questions, well, then you'll be able to break that curve a little bit, because the data is fresh and the activity is desirable and it is bringing the user back in. I have some examples of applications that do a great job at attracting, retaining, and delighting. Cocktail Flow is available and has been available since launch. And it is a beautiful app. And they do something that is a fantastic example of or it's a counterpoint to those who might say, well, Metro is just black and white with an accent color. The designers of Cocktail Flow said, hey, I'm going to help you find drinks that support any occasion and also have my app emulate the richness of socializing over cocktails. And when they thought about that, they said, boy, cocktails are colorful and the activity is engaging and rich. My app should be the same. So they applied the Metro typographic layout principles and then imbued the life and color of socializing over drinks. It's a beautiful application. And that alone is a lot. That will keep users coming back. And they also do a great job of retaining users because they actually deliver seasonal packages. So at Christmas, they'll give you a Christmas package, drinks that related to the holidays, or on Halloween, they'll deliver a Halloween package, or St. Patrick's Day. It's beautiful. Now, Delight, here's an example of an application that does a fantastic job delighting. It's called Curbside Cuisine. And there are groups of people, I don't know if there's anybody here, that follow canteen trucks and where they are. And so they like to go get the tacos from a certain canteen truck or the pulled pork sandwich from another canteen truck. And this app essentially takes all the guesswork out of that. You go in, you open up the map, and you find out where your canteen truck may be located. You can also see how that canteen truck, it might be communicating where it is or tweeting about different specials and offering deals. This app brings that all together. It's delighting users because it's helping them find something that's actually kind of hard to do if you're driving around between meals or between meetings. And they do it in a very rich and beautiful way. Finally, the retain. Now, if you ask me, I've seen a lot of applications. This is the one where a lot of apps are currently kind of missing. The retain for me means bring me back. Bring me something that will keep me coming back into this application. There are apps that are doing it, and they're starting to appear more and more. But retain is the key. I think if you guys focus on how do I keep my users coming back into my app, this is the thing I'd have you focus on. So I have an example of Amazon.com. And what they do right off the start is they orient you in a very familiar brand. You pan over once in the panorama, and suddenly you see that everything they're showing you is based off of your purchases. It's not just Amazon now, it's your Amazon. That's way different from just being overwhelmed with everything that Amazon's trying to sell you. It is personal to you. And then you pan over one more time and they're giving you the deals of the day and the lightning deals. And now that content is always fresh. If they were to take this to the next step, they can really seal a deal about being the best retaining app. If they have a live tile that said, hey, there is a new product that we're advertising because it's a lightning deal, right on their live tile, they would attract you sooner because you now are being told something's new in there, and you'd be able to get to that content faster. Users would reuse and re-go into that app every single day. All of those opportunities that I'm talking about are there for you and have been there since we've launched 7, and there'll be more in Mango. But let's talk about taking it to the next level. The first thing I'm going to do as we do this is review what a pivot and a panorama is. Then I'll talk to you a little about live tiles. And by the way, there are tiles on Windows, so this will be relevant. And then motion. So pivots and panoramas. Understand them simply as controls. They are something you can call and put in, and then you have to put in the data. What's the difference? Pivots are focused, efficient, and habitual. They are great at things like sorting emails, sorting content, filtering, while panoramas are expansive and exploratory. They're meant to be dynamic. When you think about, boy, which one should I choose? If you're trying to provide users with a moment of discovery, hey, is there something new? Is there something that's bubbling up on the conversation within a social network? A panorama is a great way to do that. And when you do that, make it extremely visually delightful and engaging. The user is there almost to browse or snack. They're just sort of saying, hey, what's new? What might I find? Now, if you're trying to move a user down an efficient task, like find that email that Angela sent me, you probably want to use a pivot because you want to pivot over to sent by or something like that. The difference there is you're trying to keep a user very focused versus enabling a user to explore and play a little bit. I'll make one more point about the panorama. The metaphor I like to use is a magazine cover. When you build your panorama for your application, think about magazine covers. They do not show you everything that's in the magazine. They show you one big image and maybe 4 or 5 highlighted titles, maybe with another image, and that's it. They're very, very free and open, and it allows the user to take in the content as they want to. And That's a very, very critical thing about a panorama, because the control itself is just a canvas. It's open. When you put it into your code, there's nothing there until you put it there. So you're going to have to restrain yourselves and make sure that you don't put too much there, but put enough to make it fun and enriching. From there, you dive in and find everything else. Innovating on the panorama. For those of you who have Windows Phone devices, look at contacts, look at pictures, look at games, and you'll kind of see that every single panorama has what might amount to panels. Some of them are vertically aligned, and some of them stretch out across two screen widths. But essentially, you'll be able to see sort of content boundaries. What I'm trying to communicate here is you don't have to do that. You can be even more infographic than what Windows Phone has been trying to do. And on the case on your left, it's just a finance application that we dreamed up. It's not functional. Nobody's ever built it. But the idea is, I want to track my finances and track how my spending patterns are going. Well, an infographic such as this can help you do that. And notice that there is no single landing panel. You could move over 2, 3 pixels or 20 pixels and get the same amount of data and have it be really rich. Everything could be a touch target, leading you into a more organized application. The point there is to say, you don't have to follow us exactly. There's lots of room for you guys to innovate, and we encourage you to do it, and this is one example. On the right, there's an application that we were thinking up a while back called MetroBar, and we're just trying to say, boy, how can we help users find their friends and find places to go, and do that in a way that, you know, perhaps doesn't use a map. I mean, do you really need to know that your friend is on 4th and Mayor or 4th and something? Just simply knowing that they might be 5 minutes away is enough to start the task. So we were a little bit more free to create a different visual representation for location and proximity. And we created this sort of beautiful, you know, concentric circle infographic. And then later on, we encourage the user to keep using the application by showing them that there's some kind of point accumulation that they can do, either by using the app or going to the places that the app was recommending. And notice that they're not traditional representations of content. They're more infographic. Later on, you can do that. But the panorama is meant to be a little bit more open and playful. We'd love to see that come out of you guys as well. Live tiles on Start. Every application on Windows Phone and on Windows has the opportunity to create a tile. You have the opportunity to not only play with our theme, but play with your brand when using a live tile, and I think you'll like with some of the concepts that I'm showing here. Here's a typical collection of tiles that you might see delivered by Windows Phone or others. They're pretty basic. They have the theme color, and they have some kind of icon and a title. They can be double wide or single, and you know, there are some on the bottom right that just have sort of cartoon images that represent some playful content that someone was putting together. But you can take this to the next level and say, you know what? What if I didn't want to deliver a white icon? What if I did an alpha composite that overlaid over the tile and the theme shined through? Now suddenly you're standing out because you're not being a Me Too application, right? This has always been possible. Now, the pattern was so strong that we said, here, there's a background color, and you put a white icon, that everybody followed that. But you are allowed to sort of think out of the box when you're doing these kinds of things. And so in this case, should your brand be this pint glass, every time the user changes their theme, your brand changes along with it. So you're always fitting in, but your brand is always there. It's pretty powerful, pretty fun. And you can take that to the next level by saying, well, now if I make this live, as I push notifications into the system, I can reuse that pattern of an alpha composite and tell people when, you know, perhaps they can get a grape Houdini at a discounted price, or find where the happy hour is, or tell them how many points there are. It's pretty powerful when you start thinking a little bit out of the box, but still within the system. And Metro Style enables you to do this across the board. I should say, Mango brings a updated an updated functionality to the platform around notifications. And that's it's no longer necessary for you to build a server to drive live tiles. You can use the local tile API and background agents. So it's even easier now. So that's pretty powerful, and I think you'll really enjoy that. Motion. Motion is something that's native to the system. It's a little bit harder to do, but I'll give you a little bit about the basics. First, use motion to reinforce user action. If they touch something, let the tile or the thing that they touched respond. It shouldn't be used for decoration. Much like this slide repeating itself over and over and over and over, it's going to get distracting or annoying. You're going to want to just say, give the user enough information that said, yep, I heard you, and I'm responding. And that's how you should use motion. Now, we have some motion that's available in the system. There's turnstile, and that's used to jump between large spaces or from app to app. And it gives you that sense of moving through a door. Continuum occurs when you're drilling in. If you touched on Dinara Reed's name, we bring that continuous animation from one level to the next in an effort to give you a sense of context and relatedness. Swivel is used for partial screen and transient UI, telling the user that they can do something without killing their tasks. And finally, and similarly, slide is to illustrate conceptual or dead-end scenarios. For instance, you might change your theme and then stop. And basically, that slide motion means once you choose, I'm going to go away. Now, all of these things are available to you. But that doesn't mean you have to use them. You could create your own animation. And when you do that, you need to hint towards the interaction. Give the user a sense of physical space, but layer on top of the foundation of motion language that we've put there. Use the motion to illustrate the brand or the user journey. But remember that the content is still the focus, not your animation. You guys are really smart. You guys could probably build amazing animations, but turn them off because your content is the star. So allow them to run to tell the user that they did the thing that they asked they wanted to do, and then let the content that you are trying to push to them be the thing that, that they get to focus on. So applying it. This is what Angela and I walked through the other day. We identified a user journey. We started to think about page structure and visuals. Then we started to think about how we might differentiate. And then Angela gets to go and commit and realize the activities. So we focused on some goals and principles. We talked about her users. We talked about the priorities of tasks and sequencing of tasks. And we started to use those as mechanisms of designing her application. In this case, I'm going to use golf. And golf isn't just about hitting a ball and chasing it into the woods. It's also about the conversation and the competitiveness between the people you're chasing your ball off into the woods with. So an application for golf should enable you to compare stats pretty easily. So when you start, think big. Nothing is off the table. So generate every idea you can, and the bigger space that you have to do that, the better. Whether it be a huge poster or a whiteboard, pull out your pen, close your computer, and draw over everything until you think you have the roots of your idea captured. Then you also need to know, well, where is this app that I'm building going to live? So you need to know the system and how it's organized. In our case, we have Start, we have tiles that lead you into applications, panoramas and pivots and cards. That pattern, Starts, that leads you into applications with panoramas and pivots, lists and cards, that repeats all over the place. Start there. Start by knowing that those are sort of the patterns that we see, and if you emulate that pattern, users will understand your app more readily. Then begin working on your information architecture. So you have your tasks. You know where your application is going to land. Well, how will your information architecture look? And what I'm trying to represent here is that there is one that you end up choosing, but you might produce 3 or 4. Angela and I alone yesterday came up with 3 or 4 different options in the span of 30 minutes. And through conversation and feedback with a developer who happened to be nearby, we learned that there were some constraints we couldn't take advantage of. And we also learned that there was some time that we were time-bound in our activities, so that constrained what we could do. Eventually, we found, essentially, Angela's golden path. You know, the task that she was going to do and how that would lay out. In this case, it's not golden, it's green. But we both have a shared understanding of what her app is going to look like because we worked on the user journey first. Eventually, you'll produce a map, either in Visio or by hand, or whatever tool you have available, that represents every screen and every click and where it takes a user. Now, imagine if you had that before you started coding. You would code very differently from the idea of, well, I'm going to code the first logical thing I think of, then the second and the third, and when you get to the fourth, go, boy, shouldn't that be nearer the first? Copy, paste that code, move it up, remove all the bugs, undo the hack, make it performant, then go back to the fifth and sixth and seventh. Right? That kind of coding structure, that kind of coding process works, but if you have the whole information architecture, knowing what the user sees first, sees second, what the dead-end paths are, you might code a little differently, saving yourself time to fix bugs and redo elements that you need to move around because you discovered something along the way. It's all about planning. If you have a designer around or just an idea, sketch, sketch, sketch. Use paper, use grid paper, and start drawing things out to give you a sense for what they should look like. Remember the grid. I don't have the grid here, but remember the grid. Get things aligned. And oftentimes when I see sketches like this, I can immediately, as a designer, I can immediately start to look and say, hey, you know, you're going to want to watch for this. There's a control that you can use. It's a very powerful conversational tool. And I should say, as a conversation tool, that's what design is. Design isn't the product. It's not an object. It is the conversation and the process that you go through, either with your friends and colleagues or with your friends and a designer. That's design. And moving that and keeping that alive through the front end of your development process is something that will create a better application. And you can send visuals like this, and a designer is going to go, whoa, look at this. Look at all the potential. And Angela and I had that same kind of conversation. We were looking at our application, we drew some kind of square, and we were like, oh my goodness, look what this enables. Innovation started to jump off the page to us because it was visible and in front of us. And so when you start to draw your ideas down, even if you're not a designer, you're allowed to use pens and paper or pencils. When you start to draw your ideas down and lay it out, you start to get new ideas, and that spirit of innovation and creativity starts to move up through you and then out onto the paper. Guarantee all of you can do this. Then eventually someone comes along and makes it look really good. And the point of pride, when you move from this to this, is so rewarding. Only beaten by the day when someone uses your app and says, man, that's my favorite golf app. And it's that point, that day, where they start rating your app high, where you get to start charging for the app. Where many, many people can't stop talking about your app as the app that does golfing, keeping people safe, or helping them find the nearest bar. When your app is that, it's because you followed this process. As I started to say when we were building this application together, golf is a little bit more than just the task. It's also about the social experience. So the designer here said, you know what? I can build a panorama that facilitates that conversation that occurs around golf and chasing your ball into the sand trap. You can quickly bring up your statistics and end the conversation very quickly about who the better golfer is. Rather than having to fish down through all the applications and dive in and dive out, you have a beautiful magazine-like panorama that gives you a beautiful conversation and a beautiful reference point to make golf and tracking your stats more fun. And this is how this app would retain the user even after they leave the golf course. That's the key. Remember the retain? This would be brought up in the bar when you're talking with your friends about who the better golfer is. Or this is the proof that you would have when you said, I hit the hole-in-one. This is the retain piece, and this is the thing that is the challenge and is the opportunity and is the fun thing to find when you're going through the iteration process and the creation process. So here, we've moved through that whole process in a span of 55 minutes, and now we're ready to commit and realize. Take another look at everything you produced. Validate it against the core tasks and the principles that you put together. For Angela and I, yesterday, we were talking about a safety app, and we were saying, well, the user has to be safe. And the user needs to be able to call their friends if they think they're in trouble. Those were our principles. And when we got done with our little sketch, we asked ourselves, hey, did this design, this little drawing we put on 2 or 3 pieces of paper, meet those principles? And I think we said yes. So high five to us. High five. We said yes. And now Angela and I were chatting earlier today, and she's like, I'm still designing. This is fun. And later on, she's going to go, her words, to the easy part, the coding. And by the way, that's the hard part for me. I can't code anything. I couldn't code my way out of a wet paper bag. I find the design part fun and easy. My challenge to all of you is to make that part of your process. Design, then build. Design, then build. Design, then build. Now, you might say, boy, I don't have time to do all of that. You do. You do. Part of generating a conversation with users through applications is that you're going to update your app down the line. So if you have 3 months to build an app, at least make 1 month your design process, another month your build process, and the last month your refine and testing process. That's 3 months. But in the 4th month, update. And I can't tell you how many users, particularly on Windows phones, because we tell you when the apps have been updated. I can't tell you how many of my friends who use Windows phones, how excited they get when they see that their favorite app was updated. That's conversation alone, and that hits the retain button too. So when you're sitting there and saying, boy, I don't have enough time to do all this, you do. Design, then build, then come back to it. You'll have a great app. Then move to final polish. So what's next? Internalize the process, apply it to the new features in your phone, and go and build. Now, for those of you who haven't built an app yet, I have some recommendations. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are patterns that already exist on the phone. There are tools. Use those patterns and tools. Build a small app first. Don't reinvent the entire world. Don't boil the ocean. Build something small. Get used to it. You know, before you run a marathon, you stretch out, or you run, maybe a quarter mile. When you build an app for the first time on any platform, do something simple. Build a lot of small apps. Then bring them together if they were all part of a bigger thing. But practice. Go slow at first and then go fast. And that's, by the way, the same thing that can be said of design. Eventually, and Angela can attest to this, we moved pretty fast through the design process because it's something I have internalized. Angela, when she does it for her next app, she'll do it very, very fast, and I'm sure very, very well. Angela's now the star of this show. But it is true. So internalize the process, repeat it, do it simply first, and then add your complexity. Apply it to the new features. Thank you so much. With that, I'll just say one call to action. It's not only the name of the conference, so go and build, but please go and design. Thanks.